Kennon, welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Thank you for the time for coming on. From what I've gathered from your background, your bio, and your areas of interest and what we could talk about that I think is very interesting, the idea of essentially what's wrong with the world today, what's going on, and how can design play a part in remedying that. As a remedy in some way, working towards a better future, towards fixing these problems.
Okay, well, I guess I always start from a humanistic perspective, and then kind of work out, because I do think design is misunderstood, frankly, and because it's something that most of us don't think about. That's actually a good thing. If you're not thinking about design, it means it's working.
Now, is that like the thing where if you're a director, it's hard for you to enjoy movies because you're pulling it apart the whole time, as a photographer, I can't really look at an architectural image without I don't enjoy it, I critique it.
Right. Well, I guess that's part of it. But I feel like I spend a lot of time now just trying to demystify what we do and how we do it, and help people sort of better understand a little bit about how design affects them and how it affects their daily life, just starting at that level, and then you kind of work out the sort of bigger issues that you're talking about.
For someone who doesn't think about design all the time, and if you had 3 points to help convey to them, to help them widen their perspective to understand design a little bit more, what are those touch points where you go initially to help people start to understand the value and the impact of design in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I think you have to think of design as a form of storytelling. That there's a narrative to it. And if you kind of look at it that way, it's an easier way for most people to understand and kind of access it. The smallest objects that you encounter in your life, the best ones have a kind of personality, that they speak to you in some way. Right. And they're telling a story. They either tell a story of their utility, how they're used, and that's probably the most common way that people encounter design. But they're also speak to you emotionally, and especially once you get into architecture and spaces and places that can absolutely take your breath away, and you're not even sure what's going on. That's the power of design.
Yeah, I have some family friends that have gone through a pretty tragic event, and the father took his son's in the hospital. He took a lot of the things that were surrounding the incident that caused everything, and actually made a stuffed animal shark for his son out of like a lot of the things that mean things from the situation.
Right.
And it's like you could have just bought a stuffed animal.
Yeah.
What did you do all this for?
Right.
Well, when you hold it, it speaks to you from every part of that whole situation, from different aspects of things that meant something before the situation, and point to kind of a trajectory of what you need to focus on beyond the situation. And all that's designed into this stuffed animal that a father made just thoughtfully and through love, sitting there with creativity and experience to design something that spoke to the experience, but also acted as a conduit to make it through that time, if you will, as a creative expression. And to see that, hear about it, hold it, was like just, whoa, it really like affected you, gave you goosebumps. And now in what you're saying in that same way, to me, it reflects part of that out to say that when you come into a space, there should be not simply a this met code and it keeps you dry.
Right.
What are you complaining about?
Right.
There's the power of design is much more so in the part that we can't necessarily quantify financially. Yeah. It's a little more so in the story and the experience that then requires the finances and the planning, I guess, that you're talking about. But it's almost you can't quantify it other than in the experience that's the real value that design gives it. It seems like kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very powerful story, and I think it's a great way for someone to sort of understand that design, everything that you touch, most everything has been designed to some degree. You know, people have actually, you know, in many cases, like many people, have put effort and thought into not only thinking about it, but also creating it, making it, you know, marketing it, you know, putting it out there in the world so that you can encounter it. And we don't get, actually podcasting, frankly, is one of the best mediums, I think, for discussing this issue, because you have to unpack it. You know, you have to really say, well, these are items that we impart meaning to. So, you know, that's a great story. I'm going to borrow that story quickly, because it's such a great way to think about design. You know, and you know, and life is, for everybody, is full of ups and downs, right? It's just nobody has a perfect life, and the humanity of what we do is the meaning that we impart into everything. You know, our relationships with each other. Hopefully, that's the most important thing. You know, but the things that we make and the things that we put effort into, and we spend that time, it can be very powerful. And if you if you sort of understand, you know, your life in that way, I think it just makes the world a little bit better. You know, it's not earth-shattering in many ways, but it just gives you a sense of, you know, the commonality of human existence and, you know, the reason why we're here in the first place.
Yeah, from what you're saying, I start to translate it to understand what you're saying and to apply it in foundations of thinking and meaning that I have. I start to think of it as, design as a physical manifestation of meaning in some way. Yeah. In that you can design for a pragmatic or utilitarian purpose and leave any meaning out of it other than, well, these are warm-blooded beings that need shelter and they don't have any fur, so they need, you know, and so you can but when there's more about what uniquely makes us human instilled into the design that speaks of meaning, all of a sudden it's an elevated thing that teaches us more about the deepest and most important really parts about us that make us unique. Yeah. And in that sense, I think really good design manifests meaning into the physical world and guides you, but also speaks to you in that experience of interacting with a designed environment. Right. It either tells you like, yeah, keep playing the stock market and do everything you can and rein that profit in, or it starts to tell you things about, you know, maybe there's more of a less ego-driven way that we all interact with each other here that, you know, you can really start to preach to people if you're not careful. Yeah. You can really start to inspire people if you're thoughtful. You know, there's all these abilities within design to speak to deeper meaning that just trying to translate what you're saying starts to make me like, oh yeah, like meaning is like the flowers that are coming from the roots in the dirt. Right. If you're looking at design, it's all of a sudden, okay, I'm learning from something from this. Yeah.
Well, I actually, you know, that's another big inspiration for me is, I guess, just encountering nature and trying to understand the world outside of ourselves as as well. Just because as an architect, we're not talking about small things. We're usually talking about environments of some kind, and
semi-permanent
interior
structures.
environments or either interior environments or buildings or cities, landscapes, and once you start to get at sort of that level, it really does. The closest analogy that I can always sort of impart to people is that it's a kind of music. Some cases it's almost like film. It has that sort of kind of totality to it, and that if it's done correctly, it's a subtle thing. It just sort of sneaks up on you. You're not expecting it. It's like if you are wandering around some city and you don't really know where you are, you're lost, and all of a sudden you turn a corner and wow, there's this amazing garden in the middle of the city, or incredible building, or church or something, and it's just you just discovered it. It wasn't on your itinerary. It wasn't on a map. You were just kind of did that. That to me is sort of essential to that experience, as you were talking about, and that discovery that the world is not only inside of you, which is important, and I think we have to do more about sharing our interior worlds, but it's also outside of you, and it affects you, in many cases profoundly. You don't even know why, but you just know it when you feel it.
Right. That's your point at the end there about the difference in the exterior and interior world and how those start to overlap. And it was interesting for me starting out as an architectural photographer. I came from an architecture background, had my master's practice for 3 years. It didn't work well for me to stay on projects for long spaces of time. Right. And to stay in the same location every day. It was very, very, just personality didn't match well. But I really enjoyed the visual and the creativity and the idea of design and construction and everything else. And I got an opportunity to go shoot a good work of architecture here in town, the main state court, or I forget exactly what the name of it or what it is, but it was a long time ago. Yeah. But I always, from an architecture point of view, I was always kind of more focused on the exterior. That was the manifestation of how I always saw architecture, was an exterior. And whenever something would get picked up to run in a magazine, I always hoped that they'd run an exterior photo. Right. And but when I first tried to photograph this building, I started on the exterior, and you kind of approach it like you normally would, like you're looking at a face or a person from the exterior. Right. When I tried to shoot the interior, it was so weird because I had never done that, and it's you're framing up the interior of a thing, not the complete exterior of a thing. It was a very, very different way of thinking that I just had never done before. I'd never had any training in actually trying to compose with a camera on the interior of a building, where your framing elements are all around you, focusing to a spot. Right. Rather than you're using background everywhere to focus on an item, a building or something, Yeah. And that's an interesting way, what you were saying, of thinking about our internal environment as the interior of a building is different and serves a different purpose from the exterior of a building, the cladding that deals with the sun and the weather and all the harshness. Right. When you get to the inside, the building serves a different aspect of your reality, and it has a different way of interacting with it and how it makes you feel. And it's a different way of capturing it, I find, from experience. But it also, it has more to tell you within, okay, now that you're safe and you're inside and you're here for the purpose, and now there's going to be a different thing that we're saying to you than the thing that we would say to you from the exterior. From my experience of shooting, there are different ways of presenting a thing to potential clients or to the public that have that same idea of what you're talking about, that there's a little bit more ability for calm, trust, and introspection from the interior of a building rather than the exterior. Not that the exterior can't do that, like with gardens and paths and stuff like that. It can offer things like that. But that is interesting that the interior starts to, in some ways, have a more of a percentage of an ability to speak to you and interact with you and control your environment, because you're inside of it at that point. You are kind of physically controlled. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think the parallels, not to get too spiritual with it, but it just in terms of
let's go there. That's fun.
It's just in terms of human consciousness, it are profound. That if you I spent some time with different architectural photographers, and I admire what everyone does in that, because you have to look at it from a completely different way in which, let's say, I'm looking at it as a designer and sort of thinking about it, and I might be thinking about, this is a vision of something, and it doesn't exist, and we're going to try to make it, and and we kind of look at it from different angles. We used to build models a lot and sort of look at it that way, or photograph the model. But you're coming at it in terms of, it's in this environment. I'm going to discover it. You may not have seen it before, or you might have seen just little shots of it. And you go there, and you go to the site. And then you got to figure out how you're going to shoot it, when you're going to shoot it. What's the lighting like? What's the mood? Is this a heroic building? Does it really need to be sort of super dramatic, or is it really subtle? That's one of the best stories I had is I designed this museum in Seoul, Korea, and Tim Hersley, you probably know Tim, he's a great, architectural photographer. He flew in, and it was the middle of a monsoon, and it was kind of terrible every day. You were looking, for those shots, and finally Tim said, forget it, let's just go shoot it, in the middle of the monsoon. And we would climb on top of buildings and, to sort of help them focus and this thing. And the most spectacular shots of this building, came to life. And it was the whole time. We had one slightly, sunny day where we quickly went inside because it was all glass and it had to be, lit inside. But, that perspective, which was nothing I would have ever thought about, and certainly I never thought, of course they're going to shoot it on an absolutely miserable day, but it worked. It worked for the building, and it made it work. And that's that kind of view about what we do is I find it's also part of that story, because you're in effect helping other people understand a piece of architecture in a way that is not something that I would have ever thought of. And that to me, that's what this is all about.
Tyson of architecture, in a sense. Like I'm a communicator of design through visuals, right? And then obviously podcasts, and we play around and talk about it. Yeah. But in the same way that the service that people like Neil deGrasse Tyson do is in that, like, I have a background in architecture and I can translate that visually to everyone, or in a sense, in the same way that Neil's like, well, the universe and stars and blah, 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 and here you go. And you're like, oh, I get it now. Wow, okay. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't really thought of it that way.
And that's good, because I always approach this from a humanistic perspective, and anything that can help people sort of understand and appreciate what you're doing, and again demystify it, is all for the good. It's all for the better. It helps people understand the value of what we do, and appreciate it, and appreciate the fact that a lot of the best architecture, at least for me, does two things. It takes a deep knowledge of the past, and it creates a vision of the future. It's basically architecture is never present in that sense because it takes so long to make. It's not like taking a photograph. Which to me is what's interesting is that you literally open a window for people to sort of understand that these are markers in people's lives. They're landmarks. To use an overused term, but they're basically are places that you've gone and been, and maybe you'll never go back, but you'll remember them, and especially if it coincided with something significant in your life, you will remember it, and it'll be a kind of touchstone for you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I always find it a little interesting to think that the intensity and the magic and the amazingness of human experience, like having your first child and getting married, and those happen in spaces always.
Right.
Either you're in the gutter and the worst experience ever, or you're in a nice hospital, and I don't know why I said that, but there's a whole band of experience. The best of them happen in a designed space and that's safe and comfortable and trust and yada, yada, yada. But then those places often get torn down, and that actual space, it's just gone. Yeah. And that to me has always felt a little weird, like that place on the third floor over there in that corner where I came into the world now doesn't exist. Yeah. And to me, it pulls more gravity to doing buildings that service very important moments in life with that much more longevity and beauty brought into them. And a hospital is such a difficult place because of both start and finish of life, and you really most of the time don't want to remember the hospital, oddly. Right. But if you have your kid there, you do. I guess that's why they're getting midwife stuff and all that. But to kind of stay on track of this conversation, with those places that we create that influence life moving forward, in looking at the problems that we're having currently in society and globally, what are the real points where design comes in and starts to help correct that trajectory to a commonly held good? Because if I look at the overall trajectory of who's paying for the mega structures that influence our lives, I see corporations as growing exponentially. I pull back from saying out of control because I know there's regulation and everything else, but when profit motive is the driver for the major architecture that influences our lives, what is the long-term cultural manifestation of the major influence of our architecture? The big money stuff being things that drive towards fiscal profit rather than we're not building temples anymore. We used to, focus on the human experience and enlightenment, and we would build massive things about that. Temples, churches, all of that are kind of, if a church gets built anymore, it's an odd thing. It's not a community civic investment because we don't have cultures that are really like that. We don't live in one. There's other cultures that are like that, and I don't know that you'd want to live in them. So what do we do?
Well, okay, so you said the magic word, which is culture. And, for people who don't know, the word culture comes from cultivation, basically
human
the
cultivation.
Soil. And so there's a connection with culture and agriculture, and we start there, and then and I think that's fundamentally what our biggest issue is is misunderstanding cultural difference. And that comes, and that's particularly acute, I think, in our society. I think mainly, but which is a strange thing. And if you think of there's two visions of America, right? There's a vision of America that, was founded by Europeans and, kind of built into this manifest destiny, conquered all this territory. And then there's another vision of America that is, it's peopled by immigrants, people who come here with their families, come here, wherever, all over the world. Some because they wanted to, and some because they didn't want to. And those two parts of America seem to be contradictory almost, and I'm not quite sure exactly how we ever reconcile that. I think that's an ongoing project that we have, and not to get too preachy about it, but I wanted to focus in terms of architecture, and when people always ask me, when they meet me, well, what's your favorite building? They kind of go right there, and my answer is I don't really have a favorite building. I have favorite places. I have favorite cities that I go to. I have favorite cultures, that are different, that I've experienced, and I've had, some kind of profound experience in those cities and cultures. So, I think that we have to get out of our bubble to some degree, and I'm a huge advocate for people. The best education I think you can get and understand architecture is to travel. Because what do you do when you travel? You go to some place, and even if you're in a little tour bus, you're going and you're looking at mainly buildings. You're looking at architecture and things like that. And I urge people to go look beyond just this monument, and I'm going to check this box. I saw the Eiffel Tower, check. I went to the Colosseum, check. But actually go and experience how people are living in those places. And culture is just going to cafes and eating a good meal, and walking down the street, and just understanding how their lives are the same in many cases and how they're different. And appreciating the similarity, because the similarity allows us to project ourselves into those worlds. And the difference is, I didn't expect that I was going to like, anchovies, but finally somebody said, no, you should really try it, and you should try eating it this way. And guess what? I loved them, right? So it's that openness, just a little bit, and then all of a sudden you discovered a world that you thought was, I was never going to eat an anchovy, but all of a sudden you love anchovies, right? This is really sort of dumb analogy, but it works kind of at that level.
Yeah, there's a quote that I'll butcher it, of course, but it's something like travel is the antidote to prejudice or small mind, something that to really get out of your experience and to experience other cultures broadens your ability to think, okay, you can thrive, be safe, and have aspects of this culture that's better than our culture.
Right.
How can we bring that aspect to our culture while preserving the good parts of that? But how do you even out the conflict around the globe? In a sense, I find that in seeing this through, like, even the town that I live in here in Maine, when we moved here, there would be a percentage of shirtless men on the street in summer. On Main Street. Since we've been here, the town has gentrified pretty hard. And the percentage of shirtless men on Main Street over the summer has dwindled to basically none. They almost feel naked now because there's attractive young ladies that have daddy's money from the college, a couple miles away that are now in downtown, and they're a little like, hey, what's going on? Okay.
Yeah.
But those men, their kids, their wives, their families are all having the opportunity now to say, like, I can open a pizza shop here now, and I'll actually get income. Yeah. And then when someone finds like, oh, I can serve a part of this, I can take an opportunity, I can take a risk in an opportunity. When there's equal opportunity and when there's, enough food to feed people so they can get along, and it's not too harsh of an environment for survival, I find that cultures respect each other more than when it becomes, like, all right, well, I got to get mine now, you know. So how do we, with architecture being such an incredibly expensive and out of the reach of most of the population, but only being something that really gets the wealthy, the businesses, or the civic institutions, how do we focus on those areas to broaden the equality and thriving of everyone, like raise the tide for all boats? Yeah.
Well, I think that it does work at a community level. And, when we're doing projects, most of our projects, we start with the sort of community outreach. We don't come to people with, here it is. This is what, we're going to, whether you like it or not, we're going to build it. And, so, the trying to at least understand the needs of a particular community, how whatever we're doing can service those needs, and corporations have a vested interest in that. They if they're going to employ people there, they want to understand where they're coming from. Ideally, they don't want them to leave. It costs a lot of money, to train them and put them in there. And then there's also investment in the community where you're helping people sort of transfer. Let's say my family was a lobster fisherman for years, and all of a sudden, that's not really penciling out. Where am I going to go to learn a new skill, a new trade, and maybe work with one of these bigger corporations that are coming in? I do think the promise of the internet, and we're essentially taking advantage of that now, is that it does open up opportunity. The downside of it is that, and there's some amazing statistics about that, is that Americans in particular have become less mobile. People are staying, in places longer, and we're not getting as much exposure to cultural difference that we were when people were moving, say, from the farm to the city. It's we to kind of lock ourselves into a certain place, and historically, America has been a very mobile society, and that's, I think, one of our strengths. And I still think that there's everything we do in terms of technology has incredible benefits. It also seems to have huge societal impacts as well. And the promise of things like we're doing right now, like podcasting, or being able to just utilize AI to say, I'm interested in this subject. I don't really know anything about it. I don't have the means to travel to Istanbul, but I'm really interested in that cuisine, and I want to learn, how to cook in this particular way. It's there. It's that knowledge is there, and that's a great way to understand cultures without having to travel very far. But you are traveling. That's the point of it, is that you are still having to put yourself into another place, another culture with its own history and impact. And you have to approach it with a certain humility. Otherwise, you're never going to be very good at being, if you're living, let's say in Maine, but you want to open up a Turkish restaurant. You're never really going to be very good unless you come at it from a place of humility.
Right. Yeah. The thing. Tell me what you think of this idea. Let's see. The driving force behind architecture is primarily the clients, because architects are not typically developers designing and building buildings for their own purposes. So you're first and foremost limited by the vision of your clients. Not that you can't be an architect with incredible vision that can inspire clients to do things, but you don't have the money. They do, and they have the stuff they want built. Now, your percentage of ability to affect change in the world is immediately diminished because you're not the one funding it. So the whole purpose of the building is there typically in America for profit. Now, when I travel, when I go to Europe, you sense a different value within design, art, beauty, and architecture that you experience there. Is it because they've just been around for longer and you only keep the things that are beautiful over time and you demolish everything else? That's one, explanation. Another is that they came from more of a, let's see, what would you call it? Not a dictator, but more of a, royal families and everything else over centuries having more precise control. But for some reason, it overall generated a society more focused on art, beauty, architecture more broadly. Whereas this great American experience we're having over the last 200 some years is much more so like, no, we don't want an artist on this bridge. We just want an engineer done. Yeah. Let's move on. But in Europe, there's always a engineer and an artist making a bridge. It's a different mindset. Now, the thing that's interesting then is that, our best influence really for changing that that trajectory of where money is spent and what we build here in America anyways, comes with, to some degree, the cultural conversation, which comes through things like this, to inspire people who have the money, who are making these projects, to go more of that direction to, no, I think you should spend more money, client, on making this thing that much more beautiful, because that is the sustainability that's going to make this get renovated in 30 years rather than torn down and built new. And to me, that's where a larger amount of snowball that builds up and keeps going. But it has to start with, I think, those who know the effect. So philosophically and sociologically, and then also the design community is kind of having to push back, not push back, but inform, educate, and guide clients a little more so to run that way, because our society is set up to please the shareholders and the profit channels rather than long-term beauty, sustainability in that way. But what are your thoughts on that? Did that make any sense? First of all?
Yeah, no, it did. The only kind of point of difference that I would start with is you said that something along the lines of that we take the client's vision and we have to sort of abide by that and in that box. See, in my experience has been, yes, we are to some degree in the service of our clients, and that's just the nature of the world. and we're stewards of that. But my experience is that I'm the one who's providing the vision. I'm interpreting their desires. That they have, because most of the reason they come to an architect in the first place is that they've got, this is what I want to do, and in some cases, I'm going to invest X, and I want to get a return on this, and so
Right.
just numbers, and that's a huge driver in our culture. So you can't deny it. But at the same time, they may not know exactly what that looks like, right? That they may not understand, and then they may not fully understand the knock-on effects of if it's just, I want to make money and this is all I want to do. You could drive that a certain way, but what you end up doing is creating spaces that alienate people. That people don't have pride in what they're doing. They're just making it to make a buck. You're going to go there and it's so miserable. I don't want to ever, let's use your hospital example. I don't want this experience again because it was such a terrible environment. It made something that was depressing even more depressing, and then all of a sudden, guess what? You may have hit your mark on just a business, a P&L sheet or something, but you haven't created anything that's lasting and that's not going to continue to accelerate, even just from a purely profitable, perspective. So, it's tricky, but I do think that the thing I would say the number one problem architects have is we don't spend enough time talking about the value that we bring to what we do. You have to be able to talk about it that way. And value is not just, we can build within your budget and we can hit our numbers and we can make sure everything runs on time. But it's what happens after, right? How do people encounter what you're doing? How do your employees feel about where they're working? I just saw this great post on LinkedIn this morning. This guy wrote this thing about the new Uber headquarters, and so he was talking about the beauty of the architecture, but he was also saying how strange it was for Uber, which is sort of synonymous with the gig economy, that all of a sudden now they're creating big corporate offices like Google and Meta and these other things, and insisting that everybody returns to work for 5 days a week. That's indicative of a real sort of cultural shift, where to some degree that kind of power dynamic that you were talking about, is starting to swing a little bit the other way. We're really trying to empower the people who are who realize they have a voice now. They can form their communities. Some of it good, some of it awful, some of it great. But at least there's a sense of power in coming together in some kind of community. For me, I'd rather have people do that physically, come together, in an actual space, and so the architecture is reality, basically, But we have, terrific substitutes for that. I personally would like to see a little more guardrails in our social media interaction than the kind of Wild West that I think that, some people advocate.
Yeah, the interconnectedness of our society now has created a level of awareness that has also fostered and grown our general awareness of all the craziness of the world and all the politicalness, there's no better time to have lived on the earth as far as safety and prospering. Yeah. And no worse time on earth to live than it all could end extremely quickly. Yeah. So you have this incredible flourishing for the most people possible with the fragility of all of that infrastructure and societal technology and everything that creates the ease also creates the ease and easiness of ending it all very quickly. It's unavoidable. With every new technology, you get great power for good and bad right at the same time. Yeah. And that's such a weird thing for us to come to this point and then see, at least with our nation, that our investment in public, civic, spiritual investment declines as far as architecture, public space, and everything else is less than you'll find in Europe and in Canada and other more socialized nations. And I am not a socialist to any stretch, but I'd be doing my own ideas a disservice to not recognize the shortcoming that, look, these socialist countries have a better thing than us in this way. So how do we take what we have and channel towards, all right, more public awareness, public equality, and we're having that conversation at it's the exact conversation we're having right now through design, but it has to be something that reaches deeper than those who have not as much, being the designer limited by the budget of the client. We have to be able to reach the clients to say, the trajectory of our society needs to be one that we channel money towards overall good, and overall good with the actual purpose of projects, not just, well, we built an atrium and made it look nice and we used indigenous carvings on it. So we virtued signal enough. Now get out so we can make profit. Yeah. There's this weird thing that's unavoidable in our country, and you feel it. Like, I go up to Nova Scotia surfing sometimes, and as soon as you run into someone running a gas station, totally different person than you run into in the US. I've had people at gas stations checking me out ask me, hey, did you hear about the art opening over here? We're going to go, and they don't know me. Yeah. They don't know anything I do, and they'll just commonly talk about a gallery opening or something that's going on in the community that evening if you guys want to join. Yeah. It's a different thing. They get taxed more, they have more overlord control, more thought control, more restriction. Right. But at the same time, out of that, there's a different communal aspect to it that it can go one way or the other, and you have to be careful of that. But in that, pulling in the best of what we can see from our experience in other countries to bring that in, I hope we can correct that trajectory or improve the trajectory of our country anyways. There's just a different sense of community. There is, it's still rooted, Asian culture is rooted very much in the family and the extended family. In Europe, I think it's more, your neighbors and your community, and that's usually knit together in some way. I also have friends who live in that way, and they find it oppressive. They basically say it's almost too much. I really don't want my neighbors knowing what I'm doing. And it's also, because they're highly regulated environments, they stifle innovation, right? And that's and innovation and openness and understanding, that you can change the world. I think that's one of our strengths as a culture. And you don't want to lose that. And then, I think you start to approach the differences that we're experiencing internally in the U.S. in particular, and try to get people excited about the present in a way. Just as you said, it's certainly the best of times is the worst of times, in a way, and that sort of contradictory idea about what the present is
personally think it's universal, to some degree. We don't have a monopoly on feeling great and bad at the same time. But what we've lost sight of is the future. And I think that's, used to be the thing that kind of brought us all together. That we all had an optimism about the future of, our place in the world and the world itself. And we've taken a very kind of weird turn lately where it's almost as if we've just given up. It's just like we've had this big project for many, many years, and it's built on some idea of a better world. And, we've reduced it to a zero-sum game. I think once you start to reduce everything to, I win, you lose kind of, a structure, like a philosophical structure, actually nobody wins.
Right.
It's just a immediate competition with no purpose beyond winning and losing. If you follow any kind of, like, I'm baseball, I love baseball, but I love the fact that, you think of baseball in a very long way. It's a long game. It's kind of boring for a lot of people, but the nuance of the game is like, well, you can win this, you can lose this game, but you're in it for the series, right? You're kind of looking at it in terms of what's even a larger goal, and that's the thing. We're just, all we're doing right now is just playing baseball games, but we have no idea of where we stand in the world. There's where's the standing stats for the U.S. right now? I don't know.
Right.
And to me that's I'm veering now completely into the political, but I do think that's losing that. It's some kind of purpose about we want the world to be a better place for our children. How do we make it a better place? And can't we get behind that as a project, and come together? Like, I don't really care who you voted for. Just can we come together? And because you're skilled at this and I'm skilled at that, and,
right.
we'll raise this barn together.
Okay, so let's see if I can hold on to that idea and try and get it out. What you're saying, the ideas that you haven't articulated are so slippery to try and get from emotional inspiration and thought into a, concise thing that you can actually make sense of to point something out. Okay, so I think it's built in to our trajectory and our nature, and it's manifesting in culture and society, that as things improve, as things get safer, more reliable, more serving our existence, essentially. As that happens, all the stresses, work, things that channel our attention and shape our thought process and give us focus, all those things that are difficult grant us wisdom in the process of achieving, maintaining the processes and everything else that protect us. Those kind of things offer us a natural training and wisdom, awareness, and lack of self-centeredness to a degree. If it's too much, all you think about is self, and you murder, rape, pillage, and steal to get like, all right, tribalism, our group and our group only, and if you're not part of it, we murder you. It can go too far. But if you release that pressure completely, you will have a similar but kind of opposite thing in a way. And that thing that I think we're kind of experiencing is that as we get our lives become easier and easier and easier because of everything that's accommodating us through technology and everything else, and we don't have as much burden to survive or burden to operate with, even within a society. It all becomes kind of automated, right. And we shrink back to our own just individual experience and really don't care about the rest of the thing going on. If we can have our Netflix show and our YouTube algorithm and our social media that is channeled and curated for us, we become a very, very withdrawn into the very tribe that we naturally have inclination towards. So designers and people like you and I will naturally gravitate towards the left. The left is more open, more creative and everything. So you'll, over time, but age combats that 100%. But you'll naturally, go this way, and those who are more practical and less ambiguous, less artistic and everything else, those who tend more managerial, practical, accounting type, will trend right. But as that burden of surviving that brought us together when it's balanced, it brings us together to operate together, and we value each other's differences, and then we work together to move forward. The way it's kind of getting now is we don't need each other. We can survive individually, and that's the great American experience in a way, is that it's highly, highly individualistic. If you listen to training videos of Chinese nationals or Chinese individuals that are coming over to work over here within like a factory that's set up, and there are a group of them coming over. There was a video that Obama did on Netflix a while ago with an auto glass factory or something, but they had footage of, in China, them speaking to the workers that were going to come over and run the factory to set it up, right? And they're going through the cultural different training for the Chinese individuals coming over. And in the training, they're like, all right, you really can be an individual here. You really express yourself. You really, and it's very, very interesting. Like, China has gone through from the 50s to now an extremely difficult period that focused and shaped them all into the powerhouse that they are now. We did that, but we did it farther back. And now our trajectory is maybe 50 to 100 years ahead of them, where we're on the downward side of people who have had ease, luxury, and control and power. And our society is kind of turning in on itself, becoming very, as a general disposition of those who have been in the country for several generations, you start to get kind of a rich kid syndrome, if you will. Like everything's expected and given and everything else, where the societies that have worked to the point that they're at of like just getting to that pinnacle and winning the race to a degree, they have far more wisdom collectively in their culture for having gone through that. Whereas as soon as you achieve that wisdom just generation to generation starts to drop out. And you become this easily manipulatable, here you go, here's your phone, here's your algorithm, here's that. Keep doing what we need you to do, and we'll kind of work to divide you so we can manipulate you more and better. But like you're saying, I don't care who you voted for. Can we work together? Can we work this out? When you turn your phone off and you talk to whoever it is next to you, 99% of the time you realize, like, this person sees things very differently than me, but we still have the same desires. Our family, success, safety, not an immense, crazy amount of wealth, just enough so we're not worried about it all the time. But, currently where we're at with our massive movers in society and how they spend money within our country is always towards profit channel, not always, but, generally more towards profit channel, because that's what has made us unique as a country. We've done a very different thing, starting with the Industrial Revolution and all that. It'll be interesting to see what comes of China, because they're a very different way of creating architecture through businesses, but the businesses are kind of allowed by the central power. So they're like a mixture now of what we were. We ran out our overlords and said, we're going to do this ourselves. And overlords have come back in over time. And now we have this kind of interesting thing. Whereas China was completely from the start a very controlling central government that now empowers businesses, but they have a say to say, no, we need to keep putting back in to the society, keep putting back into the society, because we value the society and we allow the businesses to serve the society. I'm total ignorant just listening to other podcasts and thinking about this, know nothing about the Chinese culture more than that.
Sure.
But our society was more so the businesses running it and corrupting the government to allow them to do what it does, in my opinion.
Yeah.
These opinions are the sole opinion of Trent Bell and no one on the guests on this podcast, just to be clear. So, but from my perspective, it kind of seems like that, and I can see where our problems are coming from in that sense. But I don't have any solutions. I only have criticism. So,
well, I mean, this is just like anything. We've invented a way to connect with people that we have, we didn't have before. The way we traditionally, for most of our culture, connected is just by meeting people in person, somewhere, someplace, and you had to be there. You had to be in the same space at the same time, and that's it. Now it's completely different, and we just don't know how to connect our humanity to that. That's the problem, for me. It's if we can just go back to that and try to find, commonality of purpose, not necessarily commonality of ideology, or commonality of, your politics. But, let's take that out of it, and say, well, okay, but here's my skills, here's your skills, here's how you bring your perspective to that. And I'm going to grant you respect from the get-go. I don't, you don't need to earn it. This is it. This is a lesson that I learned the first day I set foot in New York City. And basically in New York City, if you want to, when I came here in New York City, which was in the late 70s, I grew up in Southern California, right? So it's very different sort of existence.
You're supposed to leave New York before it makes you hard, right?
Yeah, right. So go the other way. Not too many of us go east. Most people go west. But anyway, the lesson that I learned was that every individual that you encountered on the street, that you need something from, shine your shoes or make a bagel or whatever, get a hot dog. They are the king or queen of their domain. That's it. You're stepping into their world and you're going to play by their rules. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. Right. You're a hot dog the way you want it, that kind of stuff. That was New York. The taxi drivers would be rude to you, and then
that's
a
really great way of explaining that. Yeah.
Yeah. Nasty experiences. But once you sort of said, oh, okay, I get it. I just I got to play their game, right? And their rules. And once I've acknowledged that, then the world of possibilities just opens up, right? And all of a sudden, you can navigate your way through the city just because you just flipped your perspective. And it was just, you flipped it and, said, I'm going to lead with, this is overused, I think, in our world, but I'm going to lead with empathy, and that was it. It's all of a sudden, the city's, a completely different place. And then, before long, you felt like you were a lifetime New Yorker.
I've always experienced the hard edges of New York. It's a very, very sink or swim, harsh place. In New England in general, it's just kind of like that. And then when you get to New York, it's like a pressure cooker of that. It's just insane. But to explain it that way, that it's like every single human there, you're entering into their domain. Because if they're there, they've had to figure out a way to mechanically survive.
Right.
And if you're coming into their machine, you will abide by their thing, or, beat it, buddy.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, that creates a culture of high individual achievement potential with all of the people there. And even if they're not surviving legally, they'll do the same thing, but illegally. It's that whole thing is everybody here is an individual making it on their own is personified deeply in New York. Now, if you switch that over to that would be very interesting to feel the difference of a New York to Shanghai. Does Shanghai have a very similar feel, or is there a different feel because there's a more controlling, overprotective, but also controlling presence that says we're going to even this out, and you all don't have to be so I'm the king of my own castle all the time, and you get or you get out. There maybe a little bit more of grace going on back and forth there. Who knows? Have you been to Shanghai or China and been able to experience the difference?
I spent a lot of time in China. And
really?
Here's the interesting thing that I always liked. I like the Chinese as a culture generally. They're especially, I don't want to overgeneralize, but they're kind of like us in many respects. They're First of all, they're easily the most capitalistic society I've ever been in. Everybody is angling to make a transaction, a super transaction.
Interesting.
So it's all geared toward that. So despite the communist veneer and everything, that sort of more regulated society, you don't really feel it on a day-to-day level. There's a kind of weird part of it as well that is operating so many people doing so many things that everybody feels like they could be replaced at any second. At every moment, it feels like they're right on the edge. And then underlying all that, though, is this incredible communal part of it. I would go, and work for sort of, in some cases, they were government wholly owned enterprises that were developing projects. And, I would go with the client and they would, you're treated with enormous respect, which we're not used to here. But you would travel to the site, and you typically would take, if you're flying into Beijing, you would take 2 hours to get to wherever they wanted to build this tower or whatever. And you would stop along the way, and you would go into a restaurant, and everybody would sit down, and everybody was there. Not just the CEO and the president, but all of his people, all the way down to the intern, beyond to the guys who were driving the cars. Everybody was sitting around that table, and everybody was eating, and everybody was interacting in that, as if they were just one big family. So that's the core of their society. It's geared towards this, very strong family, extended family, nucleus that undergirds every interaction. And, so I don't know, that if you start to understand the world that way, you can see how all of a sudden they don't seem so strange or, why do they live this way? And, all this kind of stuff that we project onto other cultures. It's, there are benefits to that. And, there's obviously some downside, but, there's still humanity there. And I don't know, that's basically, what I'm advocating, and what I do.
Yeah, I wonder how the trajectory of that culture that you speak of, that the coming together and the being together and socializing on that level of community that you witness, that it seems like they've gone from socialist to socialist/capitalist overlay in the best way that a primarily socialist government could do that potentially. I don't really know anything about China, but it seems like they're obviously doing well. And the products like DJI, the drones that I've used and stuff, are just insanely advanced. They're incredible. Yeah. So they produce good product, and as a culture are a powerhouse, and as an influence in the world are a powerhouse. And this comes from their culture. That they had a very intense revolution and an ideological shift, but that ideology has grown over time. It's interesting if you look into the history of it. But where they're at now with this high capitalism, but then still this strong sense of community, I wonder from my American experience how long that sense of community can stay intact while being so successful. Because success carries a lot of corrosive effects. I mean, just the success of having this in my pocket all the time disconnects me from everyone around me. Yeah. And it pulls my focus, values, and attention away from the heart, mind, and souls of those around me, and towards what the algorithm feeds me, and diminishes the value points that I check with before I make a decision. So when I'm, when I'm mega wealthy and my business is, doing a huge project, I've been influenced by this for a long time. And when I go to start to make those decisions, I'm hopefully going to have a well-informed architect with a good cultural background who has values and things that starts to push me in a direction to say, yes, but, you profit, but what about? And what about, can we bring this in? And if you do this, you might have a longer return culturally that over time gives you a more sustainable economy. In some ways, we've lost the thinking of the seventh generation thinking that I know Native American cultures, I think, had that, where every decision and everything that they're doing, they're thinking how it affects the seventh generation. We're very, very, our cycle is really about 2 to 5 minutes rather than 7 generations these days. But the other thing I was thinking that you sparked in my head is that with going now with smartphones like this, we're experiencing, I've said this on the podcast before, but it's kind of fitting to this. We're experiencing the same issues and shortcomings and degradative effects, if I'm saying that right, degrading effects that we've gone through with outsourcing our food production. Right. So with our food production, it went from I forage or hunt down a deer and chase it and stab it, and it's dangerous and blah, 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 but there's a lot of physical fitness, control of my health, and everything else that goes into that. But you just keep adding technology to that. Well, now you got a gun and you can just sit in a tree or whatever. Now you got a facility that grows corn and a facility that does this. I don't have to do anything anymore. The food's there just ready for me to go. But all the wisdom, all the information that I would gain in bringing that food to my table in the past gave me wisdom and had a trustworthy relationship from food to my stomach. Right. Now, we don't have that. We have corporations that put stuff in the food that increase their profit, but maybe degrade my overall experience over time, and profit manipulates that. Right. So then we have to introduce laws and labels to help replace what was a trusting relationship. Now we have a law-based relationship. If you do that, we can sue you, and if people die, blah, blah, blah. And because we were able to outsource all of our food into we can get whatever we want, whenever we want for food, what did we go for? We went for sugar, fat, high calories, because our evolution tells us when you can get it, you better get it. Right. Now what do we do with information? We do the same thing that we've done with information. Like you were saying before, if you had to be in the room with someone to communicate something, now we don't have to be in the room with the person. We don't get all the feedback of, is this person trustworthy? Does their face move in a certain way that makes me understand that they're actually playing a game with me? There's all this weird stuff. And now we're overeating like we do with food. We're overeating with information, and it has a degrading effect on our culture. We become bloated in different ways, or we become starved in different ways, or, you know. So I think with this, the effect that we're having on our design built environment, we have a lot more information to put into whatever we want to do. And like, I can search code issues and everything so quickly now with just ChatGPT, which when I was working as an architect was so horrible to have to spoon through all that. But the fact that we have this now relationship that has lost the dependability, and we're only starting to awaken to the fact that we can't really trust the information that we're getting. We're just now realizing that the Pop-Tarts might not be good for us. and we just keep eating the Pop-Tarts. Right. And we can't understand that, this Pop-Tart is meant for, you know, those who have a propensity for right wing, and it'll make you hate the strawberry Pop-Tarts but love the blueberry Pop-Tarts, and it's only blueberry Pop-Tarts that are amazing. And it's just insane, but it helps keep the profit channels for blueberry Pop-Tarts up and strawberry Pop-Tarts up. So, yeah, in the way that affects design, you know, the things that combat that, like you were saying, are things like travel, experience that are real human experience rather than on your phone or whatever.
Well, I have a lot of hope for, my kids are both Zoomers.
Zoomer, is that the new generation? Like, is that what they're calling Zoomers?
Yeah. So
that's fitting. That's fitting.
It's good. It actually, it does. I'm at the tail end of the boomers, so having kids that are boomers is better than Gen Z. What's interesting for them and their group, and it's something that I'm tracking very closely. I really like the data that I look at every day is like sort of how people are moving, where they're going. Just because I'm sort of most of the work that I'm doing right now is in the hospitality area, so that's travel and hospitality are big in my radar. But we are seeing a trend with that generation putting less of their money, for lack of a better word, into buying a house, building things and investing in things, and really investing in experience and investing in social experience, almost like an antidote, towards social media, which is isolating, and we know it has severe mental health, if not physical health. Negative effects. But there's a hope in that sort of social kind of investment, of investing in places, going to experience with your friends, and also making new friends. That used to be a way in which people would travel. They would go and you would along the way, you would have to stop at an inn or you'd stop at a hotel. And the hotels were places to meet people. They weren't just places to sleep. You could, that's where you would encounter people from all over the world. And I grew up like that. And I really think that's a positive aspect of what's going on. That people can actually form those connections. Maybe they form them online. Some degree, it's like dating now, but ultimately, they meet face to face, and they do it, and they put their phones away. And, in some cases, maybe not, but for some, but
my son just got his first phone, and he got a flip phone intentionally.
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, all right,
and that's if you're, and that maybe is where I think you can start to point to with a little bit of optimism that, they're kind of figuring it out. They grew up in the digital world. We didn't. I mean, when I studied architecture, we studied hours and hours of how to draw by hand and how to letter by hand, and that was the training. As drawing. So I like I said, I think that there's I guess little green shoots that you can kind of point to, and for me at least, that's a cause of optimism, and I want to lean into that and do what I can to promote those types of encounters.
Yeah, that it's interesting. I wonder if our cultural cycles and shifts are going to be much more compressed time-wise because of the high degree of interconnected relationship and societal interaction, right? So whereas before it took from 1960 something for bell bottoms to come in for the first time and to come back in again in the 90s. I think we're already seeing bell bottoms. Is that still on the same timeline? Was it affected by
I think it's like a 25, 30 years cycle.
Yeah. I wonder though, with social media coming in, if all those, ebb and flows, instead of having a longer waveform, the waveform gets compressed. And maybe when that waveform gets compressed, it feels like a sharp cultural change, but maybe overall it looks like a flatter line.
Yeah.
I don't know. Weird ideas about the trajectory of society and social media and how design affect it. But this has been an interesting conversation, kind of playing around with those concepts and where it goes, and to be able to hear about your experience coming from China and everything. That's really interesting to cross-reference those, and your sorry, I'm recapping in my head your take on New York in that way. That makes sense. It gives articulation to the experience that I feel every time I go to New York now, and I can relate to each individual in that manner. To where, like, I either need to have enough of a program and personality and plan to get them to do what I want them to do, but I'm not from that city, and I'm not from that same personality. So I have to know that I can, when I go there, I need be B, they're A. And I need to be able to interact within their systems rather than get frustrated that they're not working with me to do what I want them to do. You only get to get a New Yorker to do what it is they've carved out for themselves to do. And if, see ya, bud, that's really interesting. But anyways, I'm hope that sometime when you're driving through Maine here again, if you find yourself with some extra time, we can have another conversation in person, because I really hearing the expanse of your design experience, travel experience, but your work experience, working in different countries, Korea and China, the different cultural influence. The one thing I did want to say, my dad did a lot of work in Russia as a seminary professor. And the thing that he found when he traveled around, the cities were like really first world, incredible, but you get a couple miles out and all of a sudden it's different. And the thing that he found is that, like, people and families will put so much into these odd, personally owned things, like a chicken. But everything else is company owned or government owned. Once you get out of the cities, it's a little different. And so you have these bulging of identity within the only thing that you can own, right? And it was a very interesting observation that something you were saying about China earlier had triggered. But in certain societies, if you don't allow for enough ownership or whatever else, you get a pullback of the effort that the individuals put in, the classic good enough for government work idea.
Right.
And then they focus their identity on something that they actually get to keep. And my dad just kept saying, like, they've got these incredible chickens. What's going on? You know, and they very personal to them or something is interesting. But enough about chickens. I'm sure you've got plenty of very important things to do rather than hear about more fancy chickens in Russia.
No. I love it. And, you know, it's just, we were very fortunate this year in Maine. The weather was like incredibly beautiful.
Incredibly
summer.
beautiful, but dry as it's ever been. Like just going down our driveways like a dust storm right now. And I've been actually clearing a little bit of land for some stuff we're doing, and it's just so bad. But we recently have had a few days of rain, so that's good. So
that's good.
But good weather overall, right?
Yeah. You appreciate good weather in Maine. That's what I like about it.
Yeah. My son wants to stay here through the winter this year, and for the last 8 to 10 years, we've been able to get out for a little while, and he wants to stay for a full winter. So I'm a little shell-shocked that he'd even want to do that. But again, he doesn't understand what he's getting into, and because he hasn't been through it a bunch, he might actually enjoy it. He's agreed to snow blow the driveway. So hey.
There you go. That's great. I love it.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time so we could connect and talk about all these ideas and what you're doing and how you're implementing. I really love the ability to, I do think podcasting is an antidote to social media in that it's kind of considered the same thing, but the ability to have the extremes of what you can do on these platforms, the 5 seconds, or actually pull out these ideas and show like, I don't agree with this, but I agree with the results of some of it. How do I pull those results in?
Right.
These are great ways to look over and pull down the curtain of the differences between cultures, the differences between people, the differences between ideologies, and how you would design, and find the commonality and bring those together and to respect, trust, and value them more so. I think is really important.
I mean, I think it's the takeaway for me is that everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And you just have to be willing to listen to what that story is. I also think every place has a story. Same thing. You have to be open, to what that story is. And we live too much inside of our heads, and it's not healthy. It's just at the end of the day, I think, just start from that place that everybody you encounter has a story, and it may be wonderful, it may be sad, but that's just life.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate our time together and hearing of your experiences. Where can people find out more about you and your studio firm, so on and so forth?
I think the easiest way for people to connect with me is on LinkedIn. And then again, I'm just I like to, if I can help people in some way, through what for many people is a painful process. If you're designing your house or building it, or after, before, during, after construction, if I can advise you on something, so feel free to reach out. If I don't have an answer for you, I can something.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. It's just an honor to be here, and I love the conversation. Thank you.